So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. We are here today to discuss the Indian elections that start tomorrow. And we are very happy to have with us two excellent panelists. So first, me, I am not the excellent one, the other two. I am Anwesha. I'm a senior researcher here at the Kristen Michelson Institute. I'm joined here by Professor Kenneth Nielsen, Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Oslo. And Kenneth has been working in India for several decades now, starting with land environmental conflicts and now more and more on issues of politics, citizenship, elections, and so on. He's worked specifically in West Bengal, Goa, but of course has a pan-Indian outlook in his work. And we are also joined by Professor Sarthak Bagchi, who's an assistant professor at Ahmedabad University in Gujarat. And that's actually also the state where the incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes from. And Sarthak is in the heart of, everything that's going on with the elections. So it will be really, really interesting to hear from him. So these Indian elections are known to be, these are going to be the world's largest elections. And a lot of that has to do with numbers. So very briefly, there are 969 million eligible voters in this election, which represents around 10% of the world population. So we are talking about an electorate that's almost or larger than the size of the European Union and North America combined. And this includes 18 million first-time voters and 197 million who are in their 20s. So it shows that there is a lot of young people who are going to be voting. And at the same time, there will be a lot of women voters as well. So in the last election, there were more women turning out to vote than men. And that's also very telling, and it's important. The other important thing to note about these elections is they will take place over 44 days. So they start tomorrow, 19th of April, and the results will come on the 4th of June. So the process itself is very, very interesting to follow. There are over 1 million polling stations in all of India, and over 1 million people, like officials, security personnels, who have traversed, the length and breadth of the country to set up these polling stations. In fact, there is one remote polling station in the state of Arunachal bordering China where there will be one person voting. And the highest polling station is at an altitude of 4,300 meters. So this kind of gives us an idea of what we are talking about. So now, clearly, if this is such a big democratic exercise, it also means there are several issues that are very important to these voters who would be voting. And these issues range from unemployment to social welfare to health, education, national security. And the election is also very important to Indians who live outside of India. So there is a huge diasporic community who are supporting, financially and following with it. And the last thing to say is it's also perhaps the world's most expensive election, with around 14 billion US dollars being spent. And that's just a very rough estimate we have. So now we will start. Sarthak wanted to show us some slides. And Sarthak is also a cartoonist. So he also draws cartoons about elections to communicate his research. So Sarthak, if you would like to go with the slides.
Yeah, thank you, Anwesha. I think you have really presented a very important picture of the Indian elections 2024. What I had in mind was to give a glimpse of how the elections look, and so show a few pictures of from my own fieldwork of covering several elections, studying several elections, about how the campaigns look and what will be the things and the major themes of the campaigns for this election. So just to give a certain kind of a context, set the context to the discussion that we are going to have. So I'll just share my slides here. If let me know if you can see. Yeah. So as you can see, these are some of the main contenders for this election. And it's interesting to know that many of them have actually changed their parties. So the switch between parties has happened a lot. That takes place usually around elections, but this time around, this has been much more in the news and much more a kind of a dynamic process. And that's what also makes Indian democracy or electoral politics so vibrant, in a sense that it is actually a lot of movement here and there which happens. People moving from Congress to the BJP or NDA alliance, and the reverse also happens in some cases, and that is what also makes politics so interesting to watch out. So I think, Anwesha, you have laid out the stats very interesting, very, very nicely. I think what is also important to understand or differentiate between the spending. So there is also the money which is spent on elections in managing and conducting the elections, paying for the security forces and the cost of elections. But there is also the money which is spent by parties, which is about the cost of campaigning, the cost of taking star campaigners on helicopters and organizing big rallies, election meetings, distribution of all these kind of clientelistic exchange goods and all, biryani, whiskey, or in some places, in vegetarian places, maybe dosa or something like that. So an estimate is around 8 billion is being spent on the campaign by political parties. And that is related to a very important issue, which we will, of course, I think will come up in our discussion, is about the story of electoral bonds and political funding. So that is one thing. And another thing about the stats, I think, to look out for will be this important idea of the first-time voters and voters below the age of 30. And I think it is something very important that out of the 900 plus million voters, around 200 million voters are actually below the age of 30, and 18 million voters are registered as first-time voters. So this is actually the voter who is getting influenced through influencers on Instagram, and they are watching, they're getting their updates from reels and social media and WhatsApp and other kind of social media platforms. And that is where I think a party which has an edge in such kind of using such kind of communication outreach techniques, they will really make a dent in this sizable chunk of the electorate, which is around 200 to 200 plus million voters, which is below the age of 30. And I think that is something which is very remarkable to observe and interesting to understand also for political scientists. Uh, Going beyond that, I think one of the important ideas of how election campaigns are also changing over time is something, the use of technology. And I just talked about the social media aspect, but also these kind of in traveling around in India right now, you would see that these kind of screens and these kind of vans with the some kind of a show reel or some kind of a picture film is very common. I recently met a BJP MLA in Gandhinagar in Gujarat. He showed me that he had actually created this van costing about 1 million rupees, which is filled with this huge screens and some kind of a techno kind of a tech center in the back of the van. And they are just using these vans for mobile publicity, and also to talk about the welfare schemes and different things. And this is a very interesting way of outreach and publicity for political parties. And this is an example of one party doing it, but there are also other parties which are investing in these kind of technology based campaigns, and technology, using technology for outreach to voters. This is again, I think, one of the themes, I think, of which will come up in our discussion about the idea of a certain kind of a majoritarian ideas coming in from this election also, but also in the last few elections that we have seen. But this is also about, I think I use this image to highlight the participation of women voters also, and women in politics and in the campaign activities also, like Anwesha has pointed out. In fact, the women participation in voting has increased over a period of time. And that is something which is very significant. And this is linked to the kind of welfare delivery which is primarily being targeted to women also. So not only is the existing government or the current government using, targeted welfare delivery for women, but even the opposition parties like the Congress has also in its manifesto promised to give up to 1 lakh rupees, which is 100,000 rupees annually to women of marginalized household or poor household. So I think women are actually finally emerging in a position of centrality in the electoral discourse. And I think that is something which is important for us as observers also, as students of politics. Uh, Again, this is an image, I think, which is using some kind of, the idea of politicians reaching out to voters, but also bowing to the voters. And this is also about the distribution of welfare, which is a very important theme of understanding why the ruling party is actually so popular, because their welfare schemes, what Yamini Iyer is calling as techno-patrimonial welfare, that kind of welfare distribution mechanism, which is accurate, which is very beneficial for the labharthi or the beneficiaries of such schemes. It is actually ringing some kind of bell and some kind of positive recognition among the voters for supporting the government. Besides all of these other factors like on religious lines and polarization and other things. And I'm also showing here how basically different kind of outreach activities of, like, say, bike ride. And one of the very important things of understanding any Indian political campaign is looking at the sky, and not looking at which way the wind is blowing, but look which way the helicopter is coming from. And I think this is something which is very important about the spectacle of democracy is where the helicopter, the neta or the leader is arriving from the sky and landing from the helicopter. And that is something which is very magical about the election campaign. And many anthropologists have also talked about democracy or elections in India as a festival of democracy and sacred rights of elections. But I think what helicopters also make it more aspirational in that sense, that people get a thrill out by watching their leaders in coming in from the helicopter. And there is this kind of, it creates what is known as a wave or a momentum or a mahal or a hawa. Like, there are many such kind of adjectives which can be used. But this is something which I also find that is a very important aspect of understanding any campaign. And here, I mean, at the end of the campaign, the helicopter, the neta is leaving the population away in a helicopter, and then all they can do is wave goodbye and wait for the next election. But I think this is something which we will probably discuss in when we have more for our questions. But yeah, I think then the rest we can do. I just wanted to give a brief kind of
Thanks.
outlook of the campaign and
Thanks
how.
so much, Sarthak. Thanks, Sarthak, for that. So I think that gives you a clear overview of what are the issues at stake, what campaign looks like. And very briefly, so India currently has Narendra Modi as the Prime Minister. This is the third term he will go up for election, and he is the representative of the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the BJP, which has come up as a majoritarian political party in India. There is an opposition, but the opposition has not been doing up to the mark. And so what has happened in the past, the last two terms that BJP has come to power, we have been noticing a lot of what has been called saffronization or Hinduization of different institutions. There has been a shrinking space of liberal views, and there has also been an erasure of what we call statistical evidence on how the economy is actually doing. And I would ask Kenneth to speak about a few of these issues that don't look as rosy as the campaigns do. So what are the actual issues at stake?
Right. I mean, first, thanks for this presentation, Sarthak. It's great to see the election campaign coming alive when we're sitting here so far away. Yeah. It's good to get a taste of the action also. I mean, I think there are probably two versions of how Indian democracy is doing. There's the version of the government, which would be that Indian democracy has never done better. India has now gotten rid of old entrenched dynastic elites, opening up new spaces for people like Modi from humble lower caste backgrounds to also make it in life. Whereas the other narrative, which comes from the opposition, but also from analysts within the social sciences and political science, will point precisely to these issues of a saffronization of India as a society, but also of its politics. And I think it's important to keep in mind that while the BJP, the party of the Prime Minister, is a political party and has a political mission, it also has a cultural mission, because it comes out of a social movement that has existed in India now for a century, dating back to the 1920s, that seeks to turn basically India into a Hindu nation, or in line, or organizing society and also its politics in line with what is spoken about as the Hindu way of life, or a Hindu ethos, where minorities are expected to somehow fall in line. And that process has been unfolding in civil society for a long, long time, but it's also been unfolding politically now for the past 10 years. And that has also included a quite heavy-handed crackdown on voices that are openly critical about this politics. That includes many academic colleagues in India who have opposing views, and it includes also reporters and journalists. So that's sort of the less rosy picture, and that's being discussed not only politically, but also by the likes of the three of us who are sitting here.
So I would talk, like Sarthak, to talk a bit about India becoming the world's fastest growing major economy, where it's, the media showing, Indian media, that it's pushing the country of 1.4 billion people to what Narendra Modi terms a near superpower status. And in the current election manifesto, because BJP has a manifesto, it's called Modi's Guarantee. So the Prime Minister guarantees certain freedoms to the people. And one of them is the goal of lifting India to a developed economy by 2047 from a middle income level. So currently it's a middle income country. So how true, or what are these more economic discussions that's happening? And one of the reasons also why he enjoys a lot of popularity is about taking India to a world stage. So no one knew about India, 20 years ago, but now look at, Indians doing so well. So it's very parallel to the Trump's campaign, just as he has Make America Great Again, we are talking about the Make in India, Made in India campaign. So Sarthak, if you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, thank you, Anwesha. So I think one testimony to that Narendra Modi's claim would be people in Bergen wouldn't have been discussing Indian elections 20 years ago, but now they are doing it. So that would be one claim for, Narendra Modi's supporters would say that, see, we told you, we are in the news. But whether it is for the right reasons or wrong reasons is up in the air for all of us to guess. But the point about economy is very important, I think, and that is what is actually revealing more about the kind of duality of the narratives that Kenneth was talking about. So Narendra Modi's claim is that, India is becoming a strong nation, and India is becoming finally, with the G20, summit presidency, which is, of course, a procedural kind of a thing, but it is being posed as, or it is being packaged as a substantive glory. And in terms of world diplomacy also, India has been actually punching much above its weight. And that is being credited to Narendra Modi's personal charisma and his personal rapport with world leaders. And he's actually, if you look at the Indian media, they are presenting Narendra Modi not only as the Prime Minister of India, but as a global leader, right? There are several kind of surveys which are indicating towards that. But going back to the economy, I think what is actually emerging is the kind of inequality, the rising inequality. So at one stage, yes, India's economy, GDP has grown, and the growth rate of the GDP is also very very healthy in the sense that it is above 7% annually, and that's actually good for this kind of a scale of this kind of an economy. But in terms of per capita income, India is actually among the lower stages of the middle income category. It is still around ranked 142 among all the countries in the world in terms of per capita GDP. If we look at the CSDS survey for pre-poll survey of what is actually one of the major election issues. Unemployment is actually the biggest issue that has 27% of the people in India have actually said that unemployment is the biggest issue about for this election. But there is no discourse on unemployment, unfortunately, from the ruling party because they don't want to admit it, right? That there is an unemployment. Unemployment actually has been highest in the last 45 years. In fact, there is this International Labour Organization survey which now said that the more educated you are in India, the more likelihood of you being unemployed. So that is something which is very stark that, you have, I pointed out that, you have the 200 million people who are young voters who are, aspiring for some kind of, place in the pie, but there is no pie for them to eat, like, or to share. And that is something which is very important. Then how do you address this gap? I mean, of course, there will be diversionary tactics like shifting goalpost, and that can be in the building of a construction of a temple or finding another temple inside another mosque or something. But these are all signals, like, what Laclau calls as empty signifiers. At the end of the day, you have to find out what are the real issues. And clearly, I mean, the CSDS survey actually lays out that unemployment is the first important thing. Second is inflation, price rise. Around 20% to 20 to 25% of the voters are actually saying that things have become more expensive in the last 10 years. They are not their household budgets have increased, and their income has been fixed or rather stagnant. So Indian middle classes are actually facing a lot of crisis in managing day-to-day expenses along with this, unemployment rise and uncertainty in the economics of every day, right? Of course, there will be the big projections because, of course, maybe Tesla is coming to invest and you are opening up the space sector for them. And like Apple is also thinking about, or Boeing is going installing a manufacturing plant, and other things are happening. But these are all big ticket investments. But what about the small and the everyday sense of economy is actually not such a rosy picture. And that is something which needs to be highlighted in electoral discourse or needs to be highlighted in the campaign. But we also see that the media is not really paying attention to that. And the media is actually going up to about these kind of world diplomacy ideas. And, I mean, this claim of India being a global superpower. By the way, the CSDS survey also said only 2% of the people who were interviewed actually in the survey, only 2% of the respondents said that they believe India has become a superpower in the world, or India has found out. So the idea that, there can be some noise about, all these kind of achievements, and which can be true in their own sense, but also they are being packaged of being much, much more than they actually are. But the resonance at the ground level is not that great also, at least if we look at what the survey, the CSDS survey, or what the actual ground report from the voters is. But of course, media can also have its own ways of representing and creating that kind of, how the world wants to, or how the voter wants to look at, or how the party rather wants to create the image. And I think that is something which is about the personality and about the kind of, popularity of Modi, that it is about the image that he is, or the vision that he is actually being able to manufacture and also project. I think Christoph Jaffrelow's book on Gujaratias is very important to understand that how Modi has been doing this successfully from Gujarat also, but also in India now on a larger scale, and probably even at the global scale. And this has been a very integral part of creating this kind of personality cult, I would say, but popularity. I mean, even during the COVID years, when India faced such a kind of, jarring moment in its own existence, even during that COVID years, Narendra Modi's popularity came down to only 47% from its 60%. Otherwise, he has actually been like, near 60% popularity.
Sarthak, I'll just cut you off. I think we will return to the populism part in a bit. Sure. But thank you so much. So Kenneth, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the issue of the economy and so on. I mean, if there are people of a certain age in this room, they might remember the Bill Clinton, George Bush Senior campaign years ago, where Clinton successfully kept on harping about, it's the economy, stupid. So whenever Bush was talking about something else, he brought issues back to the economy, because bread and butter issues, they tend to matter. And in all likelihood, if the opposition could pursue a similar line of bringing things back to bread and butter issues, I think that might have been a mobilizing force, because it's true, as Sarthak said, the Indian economy does follow a kind of K-shaped curve, where there is growth in the top of the economy, but where the lower half is stagnating or slightly declining. And you mentioned in your opening remarks this sort of the hostility towards data and statistics in the current government. There's a lot we don't know about the Indian economy because there's been no census for 13 years. There's been no new consumption figures for 13, 14 years. So there's a lot we don't know. And I spoke to a very esteemed economist recently who I think used the analogy if that GDP estimates are like sausages. Once you know how they are made, you lose your appetite and your appreciation. So there's a lot of uncertainty. But if you ask voters who support Modi, what's the main reason for supporting him? Because he is much more popular than his party. Yeah. If you had removed him from the equation, support for the BJP would also decline. So he is a vote puller, a crowd puller. They will, the main answer is he does good work. And that's a very sort of vague answer, and that covers a lot of things. I think it covers trust in him doing his best, so that even when he sometimes fails, or if he makes decisions that damage the prospects of the poor, you can still appreciate that he's making an effort, and he will get there eventually. That's one thing. The other is, which I think Sarthak mentioned, some of these targeted welfare initiatives, such as direct cash transfers to the poor, delivery of cooking gas cylinders to household, and so on. Things which register immediately to the individual voter, as opposed to, say, long-term investments in primary education or in healthcare, which takes decades to mature and which voters don't really sort of, it doesn't register in their everyday lives, where it's direct cash transfers. So there's all sorts of ways, in addition to the more symbolic elements of the politics, that somehow makes the question of the economy or bread and butter issues disappear or be more complicated to mobilize around, I would say.
Yeah, and as Sarthak was mentioning, this kind of a dissonance between what's happening at that global diplomatic level and at the ground level. And here I thought I would throw in this interesting thing I heard from a relative that works in the development sector. And this goes back to the issue of statistics. So India has some of the highest level of anemia in women. Now, every country has its health guideline that determines what level you have of hemoglobin you should have to be anemic. What India did, it lowered that level. So before, women with, say, 6% hemoglobin were anemic. Now they have lowered the level of what is anemia. So basically, they have said we have brought women out of anemia. So they have also been, meddling with these kind of guidelines and statistics to show that the country is doing better than it is. And there is this, what Kenneth was saying, there is a feel-good kind of an environment. But we know that direct cash transfer or direct benefits that are only targeting women will not bring about structural forms of changes. So recently I was doing fieldwork in a rural indigenous community in one of the southern states, where the people spoke very highly of what they are receiving, right? So they said every 3 months we receive a package with eggs, with milk or oil and, food. But then what they said was very telling. They said, well, this takes care of our probably health and nutritional needs, but it does not raise us above a certain bar. So we are just kind of bounded in this welfare targeted delivery, but it's not raising our overall standard of life and well-being. So I thought at this stage we could also speak a bit about Modi himself and what makes him so popular, as Sarthak started talking about, and also we have to understand it's not him alone. This person has not given a press what's that called, the press interview or a press conference, an open press conference ever. So he is the world's most popular leader who's not given a press conference in 3 terms now. And yet he goes away with it. So what he has instead done, he has his own radio show where he, no, it's phenomenal. I think Sarthak and Kenneth should talk a bit about the spectacle and the imagery and the PR machinery that has gone on to create these Modi, the symbolisms.
So, yeah, I think just before that, I would also like to point out that about this idea of how lowering the standards or creating new standards. If you look at, the world media or the world press, we have always, I think Kenneth was pointing out that, there's a lot of alarm and caution about which way the Indian democracy is headed to, right? I mean, so even like if we look at two major ranking systems, the V-Dem and also the Economist Democracy Index. In both of them, actually, India has like slid down in the democracy rankings. The present dispensation has actually, of course, I mean, it has rejected those claims as quote unquote Western notions of democracy and saying that India is, of course, in this narrative, we can't forget the idea of mother of democracy. So therefore, the question mark on like the great democracy. But the point that the Indian government has done now, they're actually creating a new index of democracy by themselves. And that is fascinating, right? So, I mean, we don't believe in your standards. We will have our own index and we will rank ourselves high. So, this is something which is very remarkable. And it is also coming as some kind of an idea that India is also emerging as as a more assertive power. And we don't need the kind of recommendations or something or some kind of salutations or validations actually from the West. But it's important to understand that a part and the great part of this legitimacy that this government draws is on the basis of the Western acceptance and is on the basis of legitimacy coming from West. So there is a kind of a contradictory claim here. So at once they say that we reject all these democracy standards and Western standards, but we are also embracing. So the moment Article 370 was revoked, the BJP government invited right-wing politicians from Europe and member of European Parliament to come and visit, Kashmir and look at how peaceful the process was and all of that. So that these are some of the signs of how contradictory nature of the claims that are being made. But yes, you asked about the idea of popularity, and I think what Modi has done, I mean, I think Kenneth just pointed those a few things out about the welfare and his personality and personal, kind of a character, which is some would say it's a Teflon coating that it doesn't stick. Any kind of accusations don't stick. But I think it is also the idea in which the classical populist kind of an idea in which he has bypassed the idea of media and kind of believe in direct communication and with the people. And in turn, he also claims to emanate the voice of the people. So he becomes the embodiment of the will of the people or embodiment of the people, right? So even from his first, outing, so he was BJP in 2014, BJP won around, I think, 33% of the vote share, 32% of the vote share. But Modi has always been claiming that it was about 1.25 crore, or now he claims 1.4 crore, 1.4 billion people actually are always with him, and he is the voice of 1.4 billion people. So whenever he's going to the US and whether he's hugging Obama, it is not him doing, but 1.4 billion people are hugging Obama. So, I mean, that is the kind of embodiment that he's representing. And that is what a villager in Bihar or a villager in Telangana is getting psyched about, that, hey, see, my footprints are in the White House as the state guest, and my footprints are in in Sydney in the in this kind of, or in Madison Square Garden, and that is what is also creating a vicarious life in a sense in the supporters and also in ordinary Indians, that there are also a lot of claims which are not based on facts, like say the Indian passport has become strong. I mean, it has not, right? there is a ranking or indexing of passports also annually, and Indian passports is slugging somewhere around 140 on 130 sim. But this is the claim that is made, and then of course it is also about very personalized kind of messaging through social media. It is not only some kind of things which are going on Facebook or YouTube, but it is WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is a very big, like, tool in the BJP's toolkit, if I may say, of creating this credible brand of Narendra Modi. In fact, just when this election was announced, every Indian, or I think most of the Indians with a WhatsApp connection, got a direct message, including myself, got a direct message from Narendra Modi, that saying that I appreciate your effort in joining in this Viksit Bharat effort, and we would like your suggestions for taking this forward and all of that. And that was a clear violation of the MCC, the Model Code of Conduct of the elections, that but it was done. And that is the kind of outreach through WhatsApp and through very personalized messaging which is happening, and that has created a kind of a connect, which is people feel directly connected to Modi, and that has also removed any kind of a mediation in between. My work looks at the role of brokers and mediators who try to mediate for politicians and help them to connect with the constituents. But in Modi's, and also in the technological delivery of welfares, that role of mediators have also been minimized. But also that is affecting the way in which democracy is structured in India, because candidates are becoming less and less important or relevant for that matter, and everybody then starts voting for only one kind of leader, or rather that is where the agenda for moving towards a one nation, one election is also that, to make Indian elections more presidential in that nature. And I think that is something also an alarming consequence of this fame, or of this kind of personal popularity that Modi enjoys. And I think that is not sustainable in the long run. But I'll stop here and wait for
Thanks,
Kenneth.
Sarthak. So so Kenneth, you should talk about the populism, but something that we haven't talked about yet is religion, which occupies, and that's also linked to his populism, because we know that he inaugurated the Ram Mandir. So BJP, one of the, let's go down history. And one of the things that BJP wanted to do, and this is now in the 1990s, was that there was a mosque in a state called in Uttar Pradesh, and there were these Hindus who claimed that no, this is not a mosque, but this is a site of an ancient temple. And then the leadership went on to promise that they are going to build a Ram temple on that land. And finally, this year, on actually nearing the day of the Republic Day of India in January, 26 January, this huge Ram temple was inaugurated. And in fact, I was in India then during this inauguration of the Ram temple, and it was a frenzy. It was almost like an election campaign going on, people with saffron flags, and there were these and people had taken the onus on themselves. These were young youth who went around with saffron flags, and they put these flags outside every person's home. People came together to celebrate the erection of this Ram temple, which is considered monumental in India's history. So I would like Kenneth to comment a bit on history, politics, and Ram temple.
I mean, we could go on this topic forever, I suppose. I mean, another hour at least, because this is really fundamental to the kind of political project we are discussing when we discuss Modi and the BJP. Thinking back to the 90s, what was the slogan of the movement in those days? It was "Say with pride that you are Hindu."
Yeah.
Yes.
On the assumption that this was something you couldn't do, because if you were openly being Hindu in public or politically, you would be hit on the head by secularists or by liberals who would hold that religion should have no place in politics, and that you should be half ashamed of declaring in public that you are Hindu. So that's been the agenda, say with pride that you are Hindu. And I remember the demolition of the mosque. I was 17 at the time, and this was global news, and I followed it. And the response from most Indian politicians, even a number of politicians on the Hindu right, was to distance oneself from what had happened, and to blame it on bullies and people who had just got sort of caught up in the passion of the moment, and to see this as kind of a disgrace for the secular republic that was India. Now, it's amazing how much things have shifted up now. In the press today, those Hindu nationalist activists who were imprisoned, or some of them were injured in those days, are spoken of as martyrs of the struggle for the Hindu nation. This has happened in the past 30 years. So a massive shift in political discourse. And this has happened not only recently under Modi, although things have accelerated during those 10 years, but also because of this very long, century-long social work of all the other organizations that represent the same kind of ideology that have been active in civil society in all kinds of ways. So this shift is just almost, I mean, unfathomable, and it was a celebration. It's true. It's hugely popular, the inauguration of this temple on the ruins of the mosque, not only among BJP supporters, but also among many people who are in the opposition who have great sympathy for this, who think this is an achievement. We experienced the day when this actually happened. Had my father been alive, he would have been happy to. I mean, that kind of narrative. So that is sort of the realization of the long sort of ambition of being able to say with pride that you are Hindu. But it's also part of turning India into a Hindu nation. That has been the mission all along. And of course, that means, because this is kind of an ethnic definition of nationalism, I would say, where that understanding of Hinduism is very much connected to a sacred landscape, the soil, the earth. It's not so much a spiritual thing as it is almost an ethnic thing along the lines of, say, Israel, for example. Same kind of thinking about the connection between people and state and so on. And that makes the situation of non-Hindu minorities quite precarious, because they have functioned as the political other of this Hindu nation all along, in kind of shifting constellations. Most often it's Muslims who are seen as historical invaders of India, who have their loyalties to religions that originate outside of India, and hence have no natural place in the national community. But it can also be Christians who have also been targeted as not belonging to the nation in different kinds of ways, often violently, sometimes more subtly, but also through legislative changes that makes it more difficult to openly be Muslim or Christian and so on. And I read a very nice interview this morning from the state of Uttar Pradesh that you mentioned, where there's a sizable Muslim population. And the atmosphere this time is that electorally and politically, that community has become very quiet. There's very little talk of Muslim issues, for example. And they interviewed one Muslim voter who said that, well, this election for us is not about development. It's about our existence as a community. But we keep a low profile, because if we say anything as a community, there will be repercussions. So I think this is sort of the flip side, or part of the story of the political transformation that is going on, is also this marginalization of communities that Hindu nationalism has historically seen as antagonistic to, or not as belonging to, the nation as they define it.
So I think we are almost nearing the time when we should have questions. I mean, because we could go on and on, especially, I mean, you know, religion and politics are so intertwined, and that's also an important issue on which these elections are being held. And to say that, you know, the Ram Temple issue is so important, because I had friends who live in United States or in New Zealand, and even there they were celebrating this Ram Temple.
In Oslo.
In Oslo, they celebrated the diaspora community. So the diaspora community is equally important in this project that's going on in India. I mean, I was personally reported to the ambassador as an anti-national because I had written an op-ed that was critiquing the government. So it's become, you know, very difficult for some of us, but including one thing here is important to mention is that the BJP or the Modi government, they enjoy support from all strata of the electorate. It's not that uneducated people are only voted for them. Highly educated people are voting for them. Even Muslims are voting for them. They enjoy huge popularity with women. Sarthak mentioned initially through this direct beneficiary transfer. Even indigenous people. So they do enjoy that popularity. But I think what we tried to do here, explain what are some of the undercurrents, underbelly to that kind of populism that. And chances are, I mean, Sarthak, if you can take a minute to summarize that, most likely Modi is coming back to power and what that means in a minute.
Yeah, in a minute, right? Yes, of course. The easiest job to do. But yes, I think he does look most likely to come back a third term, and I think this will be a very important and consequential. Not that the other two have not been, but the kind of manifesto that is being promised also, I think, is like uniform civil code, which is a very important issue, and moving very swiftly towards this idea of a different kind of nation. I don't know whether it will be Hindu Rashtra, or I mean there can be some other variation, but this will be not a very kind of India that began with the idea of India in 1947. Like, so this will be very starkly different from that. In terms of citizenship, we have already moved from the Jewish solis to Jewish sanguinis, and we have already changed the idea of citizenship that India gives. In terms of like our relationship with the other world, we have already changed a lot of things, right? And I think this is all going to be very important, because this is about 1.4 billion people, and this is like mother or democracy or not, but this is still the world's largest democracy in whatever quality of democracy it is. And I think this will be a bit the marginalization of people, the continuous sidelining or suppression, or different kind of manipulation of institutions, which are we didn't even touch that topic. I think that's such an important topic. The role of Supreme Court and judicial overreach or judicial. The Supreme Court has actually been the most important opposition party right now in India. By some standards. So a lot of things which opposition parties have not been able to do, Supreme Court has done. So whether that should be done in a democracy or not, that's again a different question. So I think it is the way in which and like Anwesha said, the party seems to be growing in electoral status. Of course, it has also won only 50% of all the elections, state elections that it has contested since 2014. So it's not that it is impossible to defeat it, right? So I mean, BJP has also lost power in Karnataka, in Madhya Pradesh for one term, in Himachal Pradesh, in many other different states. So it is not that it has always won. I mean, but the point is, it has also expanded its electoral base. It has also expanded, it has continuously added new voters into its kitty than it has lost. So I think that is something with, as a party, it has been growing electorally and politically and culturally, like Kenneth was mentioning. So it's a combination of all these three which are really working in favor of BJP, and which is not really, opposition, which is keeping the opposition kind of, clueless or difficult to maneuver for them. So the party is not only growing, I mean, just to add to that, electorally, politically, and culturally, the party is also growing institutionally by controlling more and more institutions under its own kitty. And also socially, that it is becoming socially more acceptable and therefore aspirational also to join BJP. So, I mean, it has become the largest opposition party in West Bengal, where it was not existing. Kenneth has worked on West Bengal. So when Kenneth was writing this piece, which I teach in my course on SEZ in West Bengal about Singur and all, BJP was nowhere to be seen, I'm sure, right, Kenneth? And it is the second largest party. It is, I mean, it is completely decimated and marginalized CPM from West Bengal. It is now stepping into the place of AIADMK in with this very vigorous push in the south. It is now already trying to claim this place occupied by Akali Dal in Punjab. So BJP is constantly trying to also grow as a political party, as in terms of electoral space, and it is really pushing really hard at its expansion. But whether that kind of expansion is also sustainable in the long run will be a question, because many of the actors which it is now absorbing in its most expansive phase are actually non-BJP leaders. So how will they adjust with the BJP leaders who come from the tradition of RSS and the kind of networks that Kenneth was mentioning? And that kind of social fabric of the BJP can also become untenable at the end. And they can also, like, a too big party like Congress had become, it had become too big to manage, and therefore it imploded. So there can be some kind of a presumption of some similar kind of implosion within BJP also when it becomes too big to govern. So that kind of a thing is also possible. But I think it is very important to be on our, to be cautious about this kind of a this kind of a political outcome that is happening right now in India.
Thanks so much, Sarthak. And now time for questions. And thank you both for being here today. Yes, Anand.
Thank you both. Thank you both. That was fantastic. So I have two brief questions, and you can choose if you want to answer one or neither. Actually, that's also allowed. So wondering what the implications are of Hindu nationalism on the prospects for Sikh nationalism and separatism for the Sikhs, so who've long wanted their own country or in Punjab. And then the second is more about the role of the media. Anwesha mentioned that there'd be no press conference for 3 terms. And I wondered how on earth the media can operate in this environment and hold the government to account. I just briefly say that I read an Indian magazine, a liberal magazine called India Today. And they were reporting on the India Today enclave, a kind of a big gathering of politicians and others. And the editorial wrote that as an editorial team, our role is not to hold the government to account, it is to report the news. That is the role of the opposition. And I thought that was incredibly naive, but I wondered if the panelists could kind of shed light on what does that mean, with experience. Thanks.
I can pick up on the, I'll go with the media question, I think. The other one becomes complicated and takes us to Canada and the US and far and wide. No, there's been a tectonic shift in the media, I would say, in 2 ways. One is the entry of large corporate houses that have bought up many of the news media, print as well as visual. The other is more of an older tactic, in the sense that the main source of income for many newspapers, for example, is government tenders and advertisements. It's government money. Yeah? So if you're too critical of the government, you may not be chosen as the newspaper to publish those government ads and so on. That's more of sort of an older tactic of influencing what media can write and not write about. But the mainstream media has all basically fallen in line behind the government that is in power now. I think we can say that openly because it's true. Huh? And a third tactic has been tax rates or other kinds of rates on news media that have been too critical, the arrest of journalists and so on. So that's sort of the commercial side of things, money in a sense controlling the media and what's written about and what's not. But then there's also sort of the other side, the vigilante side of things, where you have organizations that are not formally part of the BJP or the Hindu nationalist mainstream group of organizations, but who share the ideology, but work much more violently. And there have been killings of some independent journalists, assaults on others. Some have been arrested on various charges of sedition or anti-national reporting and so on. And you don't necessarily need to have a very large number of arrests or a very large number of killings or a very large number of tax rates, because the media, they get the message and they begin to self-censor or modify what they write. So if you go to Times of India, for example, which is one of those mainstreams, newspapers heavily tilted towards the government. If you see the election coverage, you just scroll through it. Modi. He went to this rally, he said this, he said that. And then you have an opposition politician, Rahul Gandhi, who's been doing a yatra, a long political journey across the country, which is barely mentioned. I mean, if you scroll down a lot, you may find it. So it's not about just reporting the news. It's also about deciding what qualifies as news and what do you report about. Huh? So it doesn't have. I mean, it's not sort of always openly laudatory of the government. It's more about filtering through what kind of coverage do you give space to, and what kind of news do you consider not newsworthy or relegate to sort of the regional pages of the paper and so on. But there's also the vernacular press, and that's a much bigger debate, and I don't think we have time to go into that now. But I think that whole the media thing is extremely important, because or maybe only moderately so. I mean, still a very large segment of the electorate is unreached by social media to a large extent. So, but I think the media component is very important because it determines what are the issues we put on the agenda. And in a sense, we are also walking into the Modi trap, because when we talk about elections, we talk about him, which is a reflection of the media debate at large, I would say. So.
And also the coverage is very different. The coverage that you get in India. So yesterday I was trying to do Google searches, and every time I'm in India, the kind of links that I get to read is extremely different when I do my Google searches here. So when you read the CNN, the New York Times, or any of these Western media, their reporting on India is extremely different from Indian media houses reporting on India. And what you said, Anand, is so true, because I have friends and relatives now who say we read the newspaper for news and not politics. And that's, that's quite telling. I mean, these people are, they don't want to be associated with either BJP or any of these parties. These are so-called neutral, educated voters. And they're like, well, newspapers just reporting news. And that's what we are reading. So I think that's that segregation of media, politics, and as Kenneth was talking about, is extremely important. And as Sarthak started by saying, the use of Instagram and WhatsApp and these kind of things for the young voters. Do you have another question? Yes, please. Sarthak, maybe you can take this one already.
From the Green Party, Norway. Two questions. One regarding the economy and the other about foreign relations. So, as you say, middle class is stagnating or even some going a bit down. And as I understand you, the BJP's economic policy doesn't really solve these issues. So how come that the opposition doesn't have what is their message for a structural change, and why don't they get through? As unemployment is so important. And about foreign relations, so China and India are not exactly good friends. How important are these foreign relations? I mean, the Russia war in Ukraine, well, even the Middle East, which the Muslim kind of discrimination here will sooner or later become an issue.
Okay, great. So I think a very interesting question, because I think that also lays out for so many different kind of points to be covered, right? I'll start with the unemployment or the kind of the question about the middle class and what is the opposition doing. And I think it is also some ways related, not completely, but part of it is also related to what, Kenneth and Anwesha just talked about, what is covered in media and what is actually decided or chosen as news. So in 2019, Congress had actually come out with an opposing, with an idea of social welfare called the Nyaya scheme. But the problem was it was too complex. It was not really explained in an easy manner. It was not really, also, it was not timely because the Congress had come up very late with the kind of messaging that it wanted. And so it didn't land. So now before 2024, Rahul Gandhi has actually taken out a Nyaya Yatra, and he has talked about caste census and kind of, idea on numerical representation and representation-based idea of democracy. And that has become a kind of a talking point. But suddenly you feel that as the campaign is now going, progressing, the discourse is not around that idea of jobs or income or any other kind of idea, but suddenly, like what Anwesha said, that whatever Modi does or says becomes news. So Modi is in Kashmir in a rally, is talking about vegetarianism and opposition leaders eating fish. And that is the point, and that is a talking point. Or in Tamil Nadu, he talks about this old island, fishing island, which is being called Kachativu, which is which was wrongly given by Indira Gandhi, and those become issue which are like non important issues, or rather trivial at best. But these are the main issues. Then, but you have the idea that because there is a certain kind of credibility which is projected or which is enjoyed by Modi on the basis of his service delivery, his welfare delivery, and his credibility as a strong leader. So therefore, people, and that's what even somebody who conducted the survey of the CSDS was saying, that even if people are saying that unemployment or inflation is the biggest concern, they feel that only Modi can solve that, or Modi is the only credible leader who will be able to solve this. And this is again a very important idea of how the populist leader operates, that they become, so of course they will also be showing about different kind of imaginary problems, like say corruption or black money and other things. But they will also reiterate the fact that only we and me alone can solve this. So we are the only ones who will be able to solve the problem, which is existing or which is even non-existent. But the problem solver is only residing in my individual personality. And that is the classic populist idea that Narendra Modi enjoys, which is why people, from the middle classes also, or even like from the marginalized classes of Dalits and EBC voters are all like still voting, and in increasing numbers for them. And that opposition has lost, or it has not been able to gain that credibility of being effectively able to solve these kind of problems. Of course, in Rajasthan, where Congress was there, it was also trying to put out a lot of social welfare schemes, but the unemployment rate in Rajasthan was also the highest in the country during a Congress regime. So I think in some ways the opposition has also not been able to deliver at best, or even it's a combination of lack of delivery, but also lack of messaging, lack of news space, and other things, right? So that is one part. About the foreign relations, I think it's again the idea that, with Russia, India has taken a position which is, I mean, I think diplomatically, it's an important position because Russia is an old ally. And yet, US is also a new ally. So it has been able to manage both fronts in a sense that, that is not really taking any kind of a position per se. So, I mean, it's kind of an engagement by sort of restrained engagement or disengagement rather. So that is the kind of approach that has been taken in the war with Russia and Ukraine. But I think an important point to also note here is the power of communication. So this entire social media, one of the biggest memes of this year is this ad which was run by the BJP about Modi personally stopping the war in Ukraine so that Indian students can come back home or can return home. Indian students who were studying like for medical degrees in Ukraine. So this was a false ad. This was a false claim, but an ad was made in by the BJP, and it was so popular that it has become a like the most popular meme of this year. And that Modi ji has stopped the war by himself for all the students to come back home. So this is the kind that even if the state position is very different, but the messaging is played in some way that it creates a new kind of an achievement for the leader. Similar with the Arab world. So while there is what Kenneth pointed out, that marginalization, not only in the social spaces, but also in the political spaces for the Muslim population. So 14% is the population of Muslims, and BJP has not nominated even one single MLA or MP in UP, not a single MLA, and in India, not a single MP for the Lok Sabha elections, for the parliamentary elections among the Muslim community. So, but they have some nominated members in the Rajya Sabha, which is the which is the upper house. But for the parliament, they have not nominated a single Muslim candidate, right? But at the same time, Modi has actually made very, important strides in developing relationship with Saudi Arabia or UAE. So the Emir of UAE was actually the chief guest in also Republic Day. And I think very important kind of, bilateral relations have been forged, and trade has gone up with the Middle East. At the same time, trade has also gone up with Israel. So in Israel is now India's second biggest defense partner or defense supplier. So there is a lot of things which are happening at the state level, which is not really congruent with the kind of messaging or the kind of conversations or the kind of communication that is going on at the ground level. So there is a certain kind of dissonance in this also. But I think that explains a little bit about the foreign policy, about how India is positioning itself.
Thanks so much. I think we are out of time here, but hope you will all have a very nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anwesha.